Well, hi everyone, Steve Patterson here from Photoshop Essentials. In this video, I show you how to color grade images using gradient maps in Photoshop. Color grading is where we take the photo's original colors and replace them with colors that are more creative, whether it's to set the mood of the image, or to add your own personal style, or to give the image a more cinematic look. And gradient maps are perfect for color grading because they make it easy to replace colors based on their brightness. I'll show you how gradient maps work, how to choose different colors for your image, and how to combine gradient maps with layer blend modes for different results. I'll also show you how to save your colors as presets that can be quickly applied to other images, and even how to drag and drop gradient maps from one image to another. To follow along, you'll want to be using Photoshop 2020 or later. And that's because Adobe made changes to the gradients in 2020 and earlier versions will look different. I'm using Photoshop 2021. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get started. Start by opening your image. I'll use this image from Adobe Stock. In the Layers panel, the image opens on the background layer. We're going to color grade the image using a gradient map, which is one of Photoshop's image adjustments. And the best way to use any adjustment is to apply it as an adjustment layer. That way, the adjustment remains separate from the image. But before we add one, go over to the toolbar and make sure that your foreground and background colors are set to the defaults, with black for the foreground and white for the background. If they're set to something else, click the small reset icon above them. Or on your keyboard, press the letter D for default. Then back in the Layers panel, click the New Fill or Adjustment Layer icon at the bottom and choose Gradient Map from the list. A gradient map adjustment layer appears above the image, and the gradient map converts the image to black and white. The options for the gradient map are found in the Properties panel. And here we see that the reason the image is in black and white is because, by default, gradient maps use a gradient based on our current foreground and background colors, which we reset to black and white in the previous step. A gradient map works by mapping or linking the original colors in the image to the colors in the gradient based on their brightness values. So every color in the image, from the darkest shadow to the brightest highlight, is mapped to the same brightness value in the gradient. And whichever color in the gradient shares the same brightness as the original color becomes the new color. Since we're currently using a black to white gradient, the original colors in the shadows are being replaced with black or dark gray in the gradient. The highlights are now white or light gray, and the colors in the midtones have all turned to the various shades of gray in the middle of the gradient. To add color to the image, click the Gradient Preview bar. And this opens the Gradient Editor. Notice that the name of our current gradient is Foreground to Background, not black to white. If your foreground and background colors were set to something other than black and white, or to reset the gradient to black and white at any time, go up to the Presets area, twirl open the Basics folder, which is new as of Photoshop 2020, and choose the actual black to white gradient by clicking its thumbnail. The bottom half of the gradient editor is where we choose different colors. The preview bar shows the current colors from left to right, and below each end of the gradient is a color stop. The stop on the left is set to black, and the stop on the right is set to white. There's also a stop on either end above the gradient, but those are for setting the opacity of the colors, and they have no effect with gradient maps, so you can ignore them. Now, the way a gradient map looks at this gradient is that the left side is the color for the shadows in the image, and the right side is for the highlights. That may seem obvious with black on the left and white on the right, but keep in mind that no matter which colors you choose, the left side is always the shadows, and the right side is always the highlights. If we swap the colors by dragging black to the right and white to the left side is still the shadows, and the right side is still the highlights. So now we're setting the shadows to white and the highlights to black, creating this inverted look. I'll reset the gradient by selecting it from the Presets area. So let's add some color. I'll start by showing you how to create a monochromatic look by adding a single color to the midtones. And then we'll learn how to add colors to the shadows, the highlights, and anywhere in between. So one way to color the image that's both easy and effective is to leave the shadows black and the highlights white and add a single color to the midtones. Add a new color stop for the midtones by clicking in the empty space below the middle of the gradient. We want this color stop to appear exactly halfway between black on the left and white on the right, so set its location to 50%. Then to change its color, click the color swatch and choose a new color from the color picker. I'll choose a brown-orange by setting the hue to 30 degrees and the saturation to 20%. And because we set the location of this color to 50% in the gradient, I'll set the brightness to the same 50%. Click OK to close the color picker. And just by adding that single color to the midtones, I've added a nice sepia tone to the image. To try a different color, click the color swatch again, and then choose a new color from the color picker. I'll leave the saturation at 20% and the brightness at 50%, but I'll change the color from orange to blue by changing the hue value to 210 degrees. Then I'll click OK. And now I've gone from a sepia tone to a colder bluish tone. Close the gradient editor for now by clicking OK. Now, color grading an image does not have to mean replacing the original colors completely. You'll usually want to dial back the new colors and blend them with the originals. And the simplest way to do that is by lowering the opacity of the gradient map adjustment layer. The more you lower the opacity below 100%, the more you'll fade the gradient map and allow the photo's original colors to show through. At 50% opacity, I'm blending 50% of the color from the gradient map with 50% of the photo's original colors. And now, instead of replacing the color, I'm adding a bluish tint to the image. You can toggle the gradient map on and off to compare it with the original by clicking its visibility icon. So now that we know how to add a single color to the midtones, let's look at how to add colors to the shadows and highlights. In the Properties panel, reopen the Gradient Editor by clicking the Gradient Preview bar. I'll start once again with a black to white gradient, which means I don't need that color stop in the middle. To delete a color stop, click on it to select it, and then click Delete. Or you can just click and drag the stop away from the gradient. And now we're back to the gradient and the image in black and white. To add a color to the shadows, click the color stop on the left to select it. And then click the color swatch, or you can just double-click on the color stop itself. Then choose a shadow color from the color picker. I'll choose something that's easy to see, like red, by setting the hue value to 0 degrees. Since this color is being used for the shadows, you'll want to choose a fairly dark shade. I'll set the brightness to 20%. Notice that if I choose a value that's too bright, like 50%, then the image looks washed out. That's because I've brightened the shadows too much, so I'll lower it back to 20%. And since darker colors need more saturation to avoid looking gray, I'll set the saturation value to 80%. Click OK to close the color picker. And now the shadows in the image have gone from black to dark red. We're still losing a bit of contrast with the brighter than black shadows, but I'll show you how to fix that when we get to layer blend modes. To add color to the highlights, click on the color stop on the right to select it, and then click the color swatch, or double-click on the color stop itself. And then choose a highlight color. I'll go with an orange-yellow by setting the hue to 45 degrees. Since lighter colors don't need as much saturation as darker colors, I'll set the saturation to 30%. And since we usually want a bright color for the highlights, I'll set the brightness to 95%. Notice the small diamond shape between the two color stops. If you can't see it, click on either color stop to make it visible. This is the midpoint marker, and it marks the spot where the colors on either side are mixing together equally. If you drag the marker to the left, you'll brighten the midtones by pulling down more of the bright color from the highlights. And if you drag it to the right, you'll darken the midtones by pulling up more of the shadow color. You won't always need to use this marker, and you can reset it back to the middle by setting its location to 50%. A better way to control the midtones is to add a color stop below them, just like we did earlier. Click in the empty space to add a new stop and make sure its location is at 50%. Then double-click on the stop to open the color picker. I'll choose a reddish-orange for the midtones by setting the hue to 15 degrees and the saturation to 60%. And since this color stop's location is at 50%, I'll set the brightness value to 50% as well. You don't always need to match the brightness and location values, but it helps to keep them in mind so you don't end up choosing colors that are too dark or too bright for that part of the image. Click OK when you're done to close the color picker. And we now have 3 colors in the gradient, one for the shadows, one for the highlights, and one for the midtones. If I delete the middle color stop, we see the effect without it. And if I bring it back by pressing Ctrl-Z or Command-Z on a Mac, we see the difference that it makes. And just like we did with the midpoint marker, you can drag the middle color stop left or right to brighten or darken the midtones. I think mine are looking too dark, so I'll drag the stop to the left to brighten them. You can add more color stops for even greater control over your image, but I'll go with 3. At this point, we're done editing the gradient, but if you want to use this same gradient again with other images, then before closing the gradient editor, save your gradient as a preset. First, if you haven't done this already, create a new group to hold your custom gradients. In the presets area, scroll down to the last folder in the list. Then right-click or Control-click on a Mac on the folder and choose New Gradient Group. Name the folder. I'll name mine My Gradients, and then click OK. The new group appears below the others. Give your new gradient a name. I'll name it Red, Orange, Yellow. Then make sure your custom group is selected and click the New button. And the preset appears as a thumbnail in the group, so the next time you want to use it, you can just click its thumbnail to select it. We've created our gradient and saved it as a preset, which means we're done with the gradient editor, so click OK to close it. Earlier, we saw that we can fade the gradient map by lowering its opacity value. If I lower it to 50%, I'm mixing 50% of the gradient colors with 50% of the original colors, and you can turn the gradient map on and off to compare the results. But a more powerful way to blend the gradient with the image is by using Photoshop's blend modes. I'll reset the opacity back to 100%. The blend mode option is directly across from the opacity option. And there are 3 blend modes that tend to work best with color grading. The first is normal, and it's the one we've been using so far. Normal really just means off. There is no interaction at all between the active layer, the gradient map adjustment layer, and the image below it. And the advantage with using normal with a gradient map is also its disadvantage. The colorized version of the image has less contrast than the original. If I toggle the gradient map on and off, we see that the original version has more contrast than the colorized version, with darker shadows and brighter highlights. The reason is that any color we choose for the shadows will naturally be brighter than black, and any color we choose for the highlights will be darker than white. So lighter shadows and darker highlights produce an image with less overall contrast. Even if I lower the opacity, there is still less contrast with the gradient map than without it. Now, whether you view the lower contrast as an advantage or a disadvantage really depends on the look you want to achieve. It can be great for adding a more cinematic look to your photo, and of course, you always have that opacity value to play with. But what if you want to keep the original contrast and change only the colors? In that case, you'll want to change the blend mode from normal to color. The color blend mode keeps the brightness values of the image and blends only the color from the gradient map. And if I toggle the gradient map on and off, we see that the overall contrast in both versions is the same. For comparison, here's the normal blend mode again, and here's color. I'm switching between them from my keyboard by pressing Shift-Alt-N or Shift-Option-N on a Mac for normal, and Shift-Alt-C or Shift-Option-C for color. Just make sure when using the keyboard shortcuts that you have a tool selected in the toolbar that does not have its own blend mode option in the options bar. Otherwise, you'll be changing the tool's blend mode, not the gradient map. And of course, you can still lower the opacity value with the color blend mode to bring back some of the original color. I'll reset the opacity back to 100% by pressing 0 on my keyboard. So the normal blend mode gives us less contrast, and the color blend mode keeps the contrast the same. Well, what if you want even more contrast than the original? For that, you'll want the soft light blend mode. Soft light is one of a group of blend modes that increase contrast. The most popular of this group is overlay, but it tends to be too strong for color grading. Soft light gives you a similar but more subtle effect. It uses the dark colors in the gradient to further darken the shadows and the light colors to push the highlights even brighter. If I toggle the gradient map on and off, we see that the colorized version now has higher contrast than the original. And for comparison, I'll press Shift-Alt-N or Shift-Option-N on a Mac for the normal blend mode, then Shift-Alt-C or Shift-Option-C for color, and Shift-Alt-F or Shift-Option-F for soft light. If you're on a Windows PC and nothing is happening when you press those keyboard shortcuts, look for a blue highlight box around the blend mode option, and that means Windows is stuck on that option. If that happens, just press the Escape key on your keyboard to unstick it, and then the keyboard shortcuts will work. Now, depending on the blend mode you choose, you may need to go back and adjust the colors in your gradient. So click on the gradient preview bar in the Properties panel to reopen the gradient editor, and then double-click on a color stop to edit the color. I'll double-click on my highlight color, and I'll increase the saturation to 50%. Then I'll double-click on the shadow color, and since the soft light blend mode is making my shadows too dark, I'll increase the brightness to 50%, and I'll lower the saturation to 40%. I'm also going to drag my midtone slider back to the middle. Finally, I'll lower the opacity of the gradient map down to 60%. Here's the original image, and here it is with the gradient map. So we've added one gradient map, but we can always add more to try out different colors and switch between them to choose the one we like best. In the Layers panel, turn off the original gradient map, and then make a copy of it by dragging it down onto the New Layer icon. Turn the copy on, and notice that it's set to the same blend mode as the previous one. So if you know the blend mode you'll be using, whether it's normal, color, or soft light, you can change it here before changing the colors. I'll change mine from soft light to color. And I'll set the opacity back to 100%. In the Properties panel, click the Preview bar to open the Gradient Editor, and if you find it easier to start with a black to white gradient, then in the Presets area, select the black to white gradient from the Basics folder. Then choose your colors. For the shadows, I'll go with teal by setting the hue to 180, the saturation to 85, and the brightness to 35. And for the highlights, I'll use a muted green by setting the hue to 105, the saturation to 15, and the brightness to 75. If I want to save it as a preset, I can select my custom gradient folder, then name the gradient, and then click the New button. When you're done, click OK to close the gradient editor. And finally, I'll lower the opacity to 40%. So here's my original image, and here's my first gradient map, and here's the second. Just make sure you only have one gradient map turned on at a time, otherwise they'll blend together. Let's finish up by looking at how to copy a gradient map from one image to another. We've already learned how to save gradients as presets, but the preset only saves the color itself. It does not save your blend mode or the opacity value. If you want to copy the entire effect, including the blend mode and the opacity, here's how to do it. Open a second image by going up to the File menu and choosing Open. Then navigate to the folder that holds your image, click on it to select it, and click Open. And notice that the second image opens in its own separate document. Switch back to the first image by clicking its tab. Then click on the gradient map adjustment layer you want to copy and drag it up and onto the tab for the second image. Hold it there until Photoshop switches to the second image, and then drag the adjustment layer down onto it. Release your mouse button, and the entire effect, including the gradient map, the blend mode, and the opacity value, is instantly applied to the second image. And there we have it. That's everything you need to know to start color grading your images using a gradient map in Photoshop. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to my channel for more videos. Visit my website, photoshopessentials.com, where you'll find hundreds of Photoshop tutorials. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. I'm Steve Patterson from Photoshop Essentials.